It's 1876, just 2 days before Christmas. The management of the Grand Trunk Railway, in Ebenezer Scrooge fashion, dismissed 66 locomotive engineers and firemen as a cost-cutting measure. Many senior employees were among the dismissed, but just the ones who were trying to unionize the workforce. What transpired in December and January would later be known as the Belleville riot of 1877. The Belleville riots were a violent clash that occurred during a strike by the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers against the Grand Trunk Railway. Frustrated by layoffs, striking workers and local sympathizers blocked tracks and damaged property, prompting the mayor to eventually call in military forces. The signs of a coming riotous action were everywhere. North America was in a recession since 1873, and the prospect for the city of Belleville looked rather bleak to the approximately 11,000 residents who depended on the railway. Friday the 19th was called as the strike date, as solicitors and railroad managers tried to negotiate a deal, but neither would back down from their respective positions. At 9 p.m., every locomotive engineer brought their locomotives to a standstill and extinguished the fires. Word traveled quickly, and an eastbound train was stranded in a blinding snowstorm in Coburg, and several others were stranded along westbound routes. Sir Henry Whaley Tyler, the new president of the GTR, condemned the engineers as arbitrary in demands and peremptory in their actions, almost to the level of burglars, and suggested the use of force be used to deal with the strike. The engineers' response was to block the east and west tracks into the yard with derailed snowplow engines. You would think at some point authorities would intervene to restore order. But there was only one problem. The Belleville police force was in trouble. The force was going through its own upheaval at the time. The chief had been fired for physical inability, and the senior sergeant was dismissed for drunkenness on duty. So, in desperation, the former chief was reinstated in charge of only 6 officers, and on top of it all, the fired chief claimed to still be chief of the force. No matter, neither ever made their way to the scene of the crime, and the whole force was conspicuously absent. Even 3 weeks later, the former chief was dismissed as well, but not before leaving with an arm full of police commission papers and other records from the city's safe. So the city magistrates called on the 49th Rifle Regiment to restore order. 24 officers and men were sent, with no ammunition. As the small platoon moved with bayonets fixed from the eastern track blockade, the rioters would block the western access. So realizing they were seriously outnumbered, the regiment withdrew. The mob ruled the rail yard, brandishing revolvers, tools, and even large chunks of ice. It seemed like round one belonged to the rioters. In a sense, the fuss over the strike was ridiculous, as industrial violence was extremely rare and employers expected employees to be subservient. But times had changed. The city fathers in desperation called on the regiment from Toronto to come to their aid, and soon enough, Lieutenant Colonel Dury, with the Queen's own rifles, arrived in Belleville with 200 men and faced a mob of between 600 to 800, yelling, throwing stones, bricks, and bells. Miraculously, in the clash between the two forces, there were luckily no fatalities. However, there were many cuts and bruises from flying objects, and one rioter was bayoneted in the groin. But eventually, the riot was quelled. The settlement was a victory for the Union to some extent, and did allow all men to return to work, except those accused of violence. The riot had been an eye-opener for the GTR as well. Labor relations was about to take a big turn. But now who was going to pay the bill? The GTR blamed the federal government for causing the situation. The city blamed the GTR, and the military blamed the city, and sued for payment, and won. They had also learned a valuable lesson on how being called to aid of civil power with lack of proper clothing and equipment can have disastrous effect, and so ended the unpleasantness of the first 5 days of 1877.